Hi, everybody. I'm Scott, and welcome, and thanks again for joining us for another edition of the podcast accompanying the documentary film Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier. Today, I'm joined again by one of the producers of the film, Larry Becker, because Larry Becker and I spend too much time BSing on the phone and telling stories offline of the film and these podcasts. And so we said we better go on and share some of these, at least the ones that we feel comfortable sharing, and go from there. So this will be a little different podcast than what we've been doing lately. It's going to be mostly battle stories, and whether you worked at Evans or you didn't, I think you'll appreciate some of these. So, all right, so I've got a list. Let me start. Let's have you start, and we'll go. We'll go a little light, and we'll get juicier as we go along. Okay. So you were stationed in Hong Kong for quite a bit. So tell us a Hong Kong story.
Well, so probably the best one I could tell you was when the Evans buyers made, one of their annual visits, disrupted my life for a week. And we were saying our goodbyes. We had a successful trip. We were saying our goodbyes. We had dinner together. I left them at the Shangri-La Hotel, and they were supposed to be on a flight like 7 o'clock the next morning. And I get home celebrating, they're gone. It's like, now I could relax.
No, that was those trips was when they went home. It was a joy. It was great to have them and great to have them leave.
Yeah, exactly. So I get home, and I don't think it was hour later, I get a call from Sharon Bass, and she advised me that they were going to extend their trip for a few. And she asked me to join the group Shangri-La the following morning to have breakfast. I get to the meeting, and the first thing she did was make me sign an NDA. I said, okay, I signed it.
So, all right. So, what goes through your? I mean, this is out of the ordinary. So, what are you thinking?
Honestly, I had no idea. I was just a little puzzled that they were still there. And again, at that point, I was not an Evans employee. I was, I owned PBS at the time. And, I worked as their exclusive agent. Needless to say, I signed the NDA, and they announced to me that they just signed an agreement with Bloomingdale's and Saks Fifth over the leases. And I mean, it was a beautiful thing. 3-day extension added about $2 million to the.
Wow.
And I mean, the reason that they made me sign the NDA was it was not made public. And since we were a public company, I also could not purchase any stock for like 10 days. Had to make the announcement. When I loved to see them leave, understanding what was going on the next 3 days, I was happy.
On that stock thing, this is even on my list, but you just made me think of it. So, my grandfather, decades ago, like in the 50s, he and A.L. and Herman had dinner with Joan Crawford and her either second or third husband, who at the time was the CEO of Pepsi. And speaking of this stock thing, back when you didn't go to jail for doing shit like this, he said to them, if you have an extra $10,000, put it into Pepsi because we're going to take on Coke and it's going to be the next big thing. And lo and behold, they all made good money off of Pepsi. So
They didn't have to sign it.
but that's right. So, okay, I'll give you one of mine. All right. So, I think we've spoken in the documentary, and then you and I even spoke on our last podcast here about dealing with my cousin David, who is the CEO of the company. And, again, as we talk about in the film, it was very different for the people who worked for him versus family.
Who doesn't love a rags to riches story? But a rags to riches to collapse story? Well, let's see what you think after hearing this tale.
There were two Evans furs. The one that climbed to the top of the highest peak, amazing story, especially after the situation these siblings were put in by their parents, and the one that tumbled from that peak decades later because of its own mismanagement and hubris. But that's not the tragedy. The tragedy is what happened in between.
What these brothers achieved was pretty remarkable. You know, they lived the American dream, and they let a lot of people come in and live it with them. And it was a wonderful story until it wasn't.
Coming from a generation that was so driven and willing to work 18 hours a day to be successful, there aren't that many people like that anymore.
He built a little, one little office into a world famous fur company.
They created something out of nothing. They created something out of whole cloth, and it went a public company. And he helped kings and queens around the world with their fur coats.
To me, it was majestic. It was just very, it was very cool. All these people running around. I just liked the whole ambience of it all.
That was the era, I would say, the golden era of department stores and specialty stores.
A tale about life under different times, a tale about how circumstances forced siblings to band together, save a family, and enrich the world when they had no other choice. No, not exactly. Not this time.
Well, we were kids back then. We were in our 20s, and it was the 80s, and we all wanted to be Don Johnson from Miami Vice. And I used to come into work every day with a 5 o'clock shadow. I shaved every other day or whatever it was. And I also had a couple of earrings at the time, which I think was more like Tubbs than Crockett. And David Walter, on a daily basis, if not more than one time a day, would say to me in passing or in a meeting or whatnot, "What are you trying to do? Be like Don Johnson?" And
Well, I had something similar when I was asked to go to Robbins. David, it sat me down and said, "Robbins, the chairman or the president, Michael Gould, he will not allow a beard. They're very conservative, and he won't allow you to have a beard. So would you be willing to shave the beard?" And I was 23 years old. At first I thought, no, I love this thing. And I thought, oh, absolutely, I will shave my beard to have this opportunity. So I had my meet and greet with Mike Gould, and David actually made me feel a little uncomfortable, thinking like I really wasn't a conservative kind of guy. I was a 23-year-old kid. And I walk into the office, and his secretary had me seated, and she says, "Mr. Gould is ready to see you." And I get up. The first thing I see, he's got a full beard. It was like, okay. So I asked him, I says, "So it's okay to have facial hair, working at Robinson's?" And he went, "Yeah." So I went back and I told David, "Good news. You don't have to shave my beard." And he was like a little put off by it, but I never did shave my beard.
all right, but while we're on the topic of LA and Beverly Hills, let's talk celebrities for a second. So, okay, I'll go first. I'll give my celebrity story. So, Diane Jones, who we both know and love, she was a sales gal in the greeter on the third floor, the first salon in Chicago. Amazing woman. She was like 4'11", but the strongest little MFer you wouldn't want to screw with.
She actually adopted my dad's dog. when he left Chicago to go to New York, he was moving from a big house, an apartment, and wasn't able. Yeah, he didn't want to take the dog. He didn't want to subject the dog to, life in an apartment, and adopted the dog. He's sort of a family. I love that. And I love Diane.
She's great. So anyway, this is a gal who had her thumb on the pulse of her community and the African American community in Chicago and whatnot, all the way up to the higher ups and celebs. And as we just talked about before, I replaced you in LA as Larry Freeman's assistant. So while I was in that position, I get a call from her in Chicago one day telling me,
Well, Mr. T was a bouncer at one of these, one of a lounge that I went to school with. Calvin Hollins. It was at the Deanback, and he was a bouncer, but his look was a mohawk and had as much jewelry as he possibly could put around his neck. That was his look. So Sylvester Stallone discovered Mr. T at some kind of event, and the event was how far you could throw a midget. Sylvester Stallone saw him throw these midgets across the room, and so he invited Mr. T to being in wrestling. He did both. He did boxing and he did wrestling. But the wrestling part, he told me, he said, he came to me because I know him, because one of the people I know in life, that's my husband, he was the district manager selling jewelry at Rogers and Holland. So I knew him. I knew of him. So he came down there. He said, I want me a white mink coat all the way down to the floor with a black stripe coming all the way down to the floor. I said, okay, so we're going to have to make it. He said, fine. So we made him the fur coat, and he was living in Chicago in a suburb, and the people made him mad because he was trying to put up a fence that they wouldn't allow him to put the fence up because it was too high. So he chopped down the damn trees in the back on his property. He chopped all the trees down, and they put his ass on TV. And the people were mad at him because he chopped the trees down. So the next day, we had a fitting for him. He came in there. He had his whole face covered up all the way down to his ankle. And he came in there, and he had to do a fitting. And I say, why didn't you chop them damn trees down? He said, because they wouldn't let me put the damn fence up, so I chopped all the trees down. But they were really, really mad at him. Really mad at him. So we did the fitting, and he told me, don't tell nobody who I am. I said, I don't want to tell nobody who you are, because they might try to do. He came on State Street. He came on the first Salons. Then he left.
I could remember being in Chicago when he was buying. I'm sure it had to be when he was buying those coats, the skunk coats. He bought a black one with a white stripe and a white one with a black stripe, and we had to make these fez type hats that to match. And he must have come into the store 3 times, for because it was all custom. And I remember and this is, of course, during the time where he was at the peak of his celebrity status, right? He's a Chicago boy. And, here he is. And he's in a room, they brought him into the room like on the 5th floor where we used to have like the conference in the back by Sam Field's office, not one of the other, fitting booths. And I don't know, there were other people in the store, one of which was this young, I'd say a woman in her 30s, maybe 40, young black woman with her 2 sons. And they were little kids. And they see Mr. T, and they went running up. And, I was one of the people that was working with him. It was like, I think I was getting coffee at the time. But, it was like, we're all catering to him. And this. And here's 2 young black kids that come up. They're his Dr. J, and come up to him and say, "Oh, Mr. T, could you order?" He goes, "Can't you see I'm busy?" And it was like, whoa. I stopped watching the A-Team. I really did. It's like not the nicest man. He wasn't the nicest man. But we did charge him. We did charge him a shitload for those coats.
That's funny.
I said, why are you so damn rude? I said, you know what? That don't make no sense. But he did. He did that. And he wouldn't give the kids no autograph. And he left. He really did. He left. And then he called back and he said, I'm getting ready to go to Hollywood and I need you to bring the coat to Hollywood for me. I said, why can't I ship it to you? He said, I want you to personally deliver me the coat. So I said, okay. So I went back there and I told Mr. Marks and Robert K. Robert K said, okay, you can deliver the coat. I said, well, where am I going? You know what he told me? He said, you can stay with Scott Hunter.
Oh, that sounds like my family springing the sprinkler roof roar.
Yeah, so that's okay. I'm going to go and stay with my aunt because she lives in Santa Monica.
This is just one of those moments you never forget, right? So I'm in LA. I'm Larry Friedman's assistant. It's the mid-'80s. Things are pretty good, nothing to complain about. I get a call out of the blue from Chicago, a familiar voice going, Scott Hunter! And it's Diane Jones. And she tells me that she's just made this sale to Mr. T. They sold him these two ginormous mink coats with hoods with skunk stripes going down the back of both of them. One was white mink with a black stripe, and the other was ranch, which is black mink with a white stripe.
He bought two mink coats, one with a white one with a black stripe. Matter of fact, I have a picture of it. I have a white one. He bought a white one with a black stripe. And then Diane went to California to deliver it to him. So he was a nice guy. He was a nice guy. We had a lot of celebrities.
And she says, I'm coming out to LA to deliver them. That's what he wants me to do. And I'm like, okay, great. What do you need me to do to help? She goes, but don't worry. I told Robert K, I'm not staying with you. And I was like, what? Well, she was welcome to stay with me, but I don't know. It's just nuts. So anyways, Diane comes out to LA and I get her and meet her.
And so me and Scott go to take the coat up there to Mr. T. We go up some stairs. Mr. T standing at the door. We was on Rodeo Drive. And he said, who is that white boy you got with me? That ain't no white boy. I said, that is Scott Hunter. Just said, who is that white boy you got with you? And then I said, that's Scott Hunter. He works with me. He's half owner of the company. That's what I told him. So he led us upstairs.
Go to Rodeo Drive. I don't remember if it was his studio or apartment or a workspace, what he had there. But it was his on Rodeo Drive. And we walk in with the coats and the boxes. They're huge. I mean, I was probably carrying both of them because they were bigger than she was. And he goes, who's the white boy? And I'm like, oh my God. Nobody could have said anything to make me feel more uncomfortable at that moment than that, I don't think. And Diane's like, that's Scott Hunter. He owns the company. I'm like, oh God, now you're making it worse.
And I opened the refrigerator here and had shit in there to eat. I said, well, where your food at? He said, I don't eat no food. That's what he told me.
So anyways, they clearly knew each other from Chicago, and I had not been a part of the transaction back there, so I didn't know what was going on. He's trying the coats on, and I'm making a couple of adjustments to it here and there. And Diane is nosing around and poking into everything. She's opening cabinets, and by the time he goes, what you doing? Get out of there. She's in his refrigerator, and she goes, how come you ain't got nothing in here to eat? And I was like, oh my God.
But then he told me and Scott, I say, where are you fit to go? He said, I'm going on the 18th. And he said, if you want to come, you and Scott can come out there. He invited us both out there.
So anyways,
He says to us, "I gotta go. You guys make the alterations, and if you want, you can bring the coats to me tomorrow up at the A team." So I get the coats back downtown, get the few. There were minor alterations made.
So me and Scott went out there, and I looked up. It was somebody riding up on a motorcycle.
And the next day, Diane and I go up to this ranch. God, I can't remember the name of it, but it was almost at the Grapevine, like it was past Ventura. And this huge ranch, set ranch, where they had all kinds of sets and filming and everything. And we get let in and we get escorted into Mr. T's trailer. And eventually he comes in and he starts trying on the coat. And I remember it was the white one with the black stripe is the one he's wearing. And all of a sudden you hear the loud, and I mean the loudest, it must have been a Harley, motorcycle roar that you've ever heard, coming up the hill. His trailer, all the trailers were like on the top of this little hill.
And they had long blonde hair. And I was like to myself, who in the hell is that? And that was Hulk Hogan and his wife. You remember that?
Oh, yeah. I told the story.
And off the back of the bike gets Hulk Hogan and his wife. And they come into this trailer and he walks in and he's fucking huge. I thought T is huge. He's huge. The two of them. Like you feel like, yikes, Land of the Giants when you're around them. He walks in and Mr. T is trying on the white coat. And he looks at Diane. He looks at me. He looks at Mr. T. And he burst out laughing. I'll never forget the howl of the laugh.
Because he just couldn't believe that Mr. C was going to walk on the wrestling stage with that long mink coat on. I don't even know if he still got that coat. I was trying to beg for me one of those gold chains in there. He said, get out of my trailer. You can't even give me one? He said, Diane, get out of my trailer. You're not getting it. He put me out. But I was dealing with Mr. T.
Well, things calm down for a moment, or finally after a moment or two, and Mr. T turns to him, and this is the line I'll never forget, and I've told this to Diane. He turns to Hulk Hogan, whose name is Terry, and he goes, Terry, I'd like to introduce you to my Furriers. And it's just a day I'll never forget.
All right, let's hear a celebrity story from your time in L.A. Or not, or outside of L.A. even.
Well, actually, L.A. provided you really cool celebrities. Can I tell you more than one?
Sure. Start with one. Let's start with one and laugh it out, and then we'll go to the next one.
So probably my favorite was Roseanne Barr. Roseanne Barr did a series of commercials, like 3 or 4 TV commercials for.
She was at the start of her career. Actually,
she was not a well-known, comedian. She was actually a stand-up comedian at that point. And she was becoming well-known, but she didn't have the TV shows or TV exposure or anything like that.
So, I'm flashing the article on the screen behind us, but at the time, our ad agency wanted somebody like her to try and connect more to the working house
and younger people, and it was the first time that we ever developed a sense of humor. Our advertising, it was always urgency. You know what I mean? Now it was humor, and I mean I think it worked quite well. But point was that I don't know if it was Robert. It was probably Robert who negotiated a barter. And it was surprising because, again, she was just starting out. So Robert offered her a sable in lieu of payment, of a monetary payment for her to, to star in these 3 or 4 commercials.
And for those that don't know, back then, a moderately priced sable coat is what, $50,000, right?
It's exactly what the actual cost was. But I do believe, not the cost, the retail, but what I do believe was that was the amount of money that she would have received. So we got a really good deal.
All right, but
Now,
tell us about the meter and everything, because this is before you.
so now I lived in West Hollywood. She lived in West Hollywood. And I invited her to come to the store because I had to custom make it for her. We had to custom. Needed to take the measurements, select style with her, and I even brought bundles of skins for her to make a selection. And I'm sitting in her house, and I don't know, I was always a bit starstruck. When I would see, we were living in LA. I mean, you'd see stars every day.
Well, and weird how they would just walk into the Beverly Hills store. I mean, they're just like nonchalantly.
Well, nothing. Robinson's was the carriage trade store in Beverly Hills. So, I mean, it was, the finest, the wealthiest, all the celebrities that in those days, in the 80s, celebrities shopped for themselves. They didn't have only the style. The last 25 years I never saw a celebrity. It was only had access to the actual celebrity. I spent good half in her house. And
So you can come into the store?
she asked if I would come to her. I said, where do you live? And I figured she lived in Beverly Hills. She said, I live in West Hollywood. I literally lived 5 minutes. So I made an appointment that after work, come to her. And I tell you, it was probably 20 minutes before we even got into the house. We were sitting on and she was just telling jokes. And I was just cracking up. It was like, this was better than, the annual bonus I used to. Well, no. It was pretty good. Anyway, it was, we built a little bit of a friendship because she was very much into sticks. And I knew of this famous psychic that I actually put her in touch with. And she used to call me. She literally would call me, keep contact with me after me. And, it was like, to me, it was like I made a friend with a celeb. But again, I find myself sometimes a little starstruck. And this was just very easy. It was to lead me into another.
Yeah, let's hear that.
So remember at Robinson's on the 5th floor, they had the cafe.
Yep.
So one day, David Brenner, who certainly was my favorite comedian, I loved. He was doing a book signing. He had a book that he wrote, Soft Pretzels with Mustard. He was doing a book signing, Robinson. And it was time for me to have my lunch. I went up to the cafe and I see him sitting at a table by himself. I grabbed my lunch and I just came over to him. Said to him, Mr. Brenner, I gotta tell you, you are just favorite comedian in the world. Remember as a little kid, like on Johnny Carson, whatever show, and my whole family would sit around and watch, and be entertained by you. And he was like the only comedian that didn't use vulgarity, foul language. It was all just real, real happens. And he just made fun of it. It was great. And he said he was sitting and eating his lunch. I mean, he literally stopped to talk to me. And he said to me, would you like it? So sat down, I had my lunch. I don't think I ate any of it. I was just listening and talking with him. And it was exciting. And I explained, they worked the fur department. I thought, maybe you bring home a visit to your wife. And we sat there for another 10, 15 minutes and I get back to work, go back to work. And probably around 4 o'clock that day, into the first one. And I happened to be in my office, but he asked, and I come out of the office and he's standing there and he had a copy of the book, which he, personally autographed, to me. And it was like another victory for Larry Becker. It was exciting. I'll tell you one more.
Go for it.
Yeah, there was a victory.
Let me, before you tell that, I didn't appreciate this at the time, but when I was a teenager and I would go and visit my grandparents in Florida, they always thought it was a big deal to take us to a show. Sunrise Theater was new at the time, and there were shows at the Doral and all. And so I saw Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis and Tony Bennett, all the greats growing up, and they always had a comedian opening for them. So I saw David Brenner and Alan King and Robert Klein and all those people. And I'm going to tell you, I didn't appreciate it at the time, but now I look back on it and go, boy, how lucky I was, huh?
Yeah, exactly. You know what? That's a great way of putting it. We were very lucky to have the exposure to things that are really out of the norm. I mean, we were just there to do our job, and these things sort of fell in our lap. I'm going to tell you the best.
Let's hear.
So I was in the Beverly Hills store, and Robinson's, we didn't run a lot of sales. In walks one of the prettiest girls, Charlene Tilton. She was an actress, a young actress. We were the same age. She was like 23 or 24 years old.
Hamden or Dallas or something?
Dallas. She was like the niece on Dallas. And she comes in, she was interested in a mink coat. She comes in and she sees all the people. She said, is there any way that you have, is there anything like a private area dressing room or something that you have? I don't want to be in front of all of these people. And we didn't have dressing. I mean, we didn't have a private dressing. I said, you're welcome to use my office. So she appreciated that. And I went and I selected a few things. We spoke for a while. I selected a few things for her. I bring it into the office. And she says, can I have a little bit of privacy? I said, absolutely. I says, you just let me know, when you need or want my help. Anyway, she's in there for about 15 and she opens up the door just a little. And she says, can you come in here? I want your opinion. And I said, yeah, sure. And I walk in wearing this gorgeous full length.
You don't even tell me. Go ahead.
Here's the bra and pant. Then I'm like, why didn't she select the jacket? She actually bought the coat. I mean, she says, what do you? I was like, I'm going to help.
Oh, that's great. All right. How about along those lines? How about humbling moments? Okay. Here, I'll give you a simple one. And again, this is the kind of thing you learn when you're young, right? So they sent me out to Fresno to cover one of these sales. And Fresno is not LA. It's not San Francisco, and it's not San Diego. It's not even Sacramento. And however, what was the store we had? The Gottschalks. We did a lot of business there.
Yes.
So anyway, from there of this sale, just helping out selling over the weekend. And, they were working in up systems. So my turn came up to take the next customer. And this couple walks in their 50s, dirt all over them. The man was in overalls, like I said, filthy, dirty. The wife looked like she'd either been in the garden or helping him plow or something. And I'm like, oh God, this is going to be an utter waste of my time to him. He turns to her on the way in, which then made me think even more, this is going to be a waste of my time. He goes, yeah, whatever you want, honey, but keep it under 50. And she spent $48,000. And that was the big day I learned my lesson about not judging a book by its cover, boy.
Julius and Rose Meltzer went forward with the belief that their son's death was an accident, and this setback rocked the family during a time when brother A.L. and Herman's Evans Furs was skyrocketing to the top of the industry.
Those Meltzer kids obviously weren't taught how to cope or how to parent or relationship skills were really lacking, and that got passed down.
All I know is that he had a photographic memory, he was brilliant, and the family loved him.
I think she loved the way I looked, so she was always, like, I was her little doll.
All of his grandchildren wrote reports on Nuremberg at some point in school. And someone would always have an assignment, interview some relative about something.
Nonchalantly would toss a question out, and the beads of sweat were pouring off as he's trying to answer Uncle Bernie's question.
A lot of people live in fear that, oh my God, is that going to happen to me?
In the end, a lot of people got hurt. A lot of customers got hurt. It was just a bad thing.
He's with his dinosaur, toy dinosaur on the table, and he says, you know what happened to these dinosaurs?
It was a very unique era.
Jeff and I got some calls, and people were just sobbing.
Well, they shut the doors on people. That was pretty high profile.
A fish has got to swim and an eagle's got to soar. That's their natural temperament and how they want to live and how they want to play. And when that's blocked, people are really unhappy.
Okay, you want something humbling? I mean, I was in Southland, as part of my training program.
So Southbank for we're talking about northern Indiana, Merrillville. Okay.
Yes. I'm living in the loop of Chicago, and I got to drive every day to South Lake Mall in Merrillville, Indiana. It was not only a culture shock, but it was a real hassle. I just hoped that this was going to be over soon. Anyway, one night, and I was working the iron days, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. in the store. And it was just like repeat. Every day I would drive 2 hours, be there at 9. I'd leave at 9. I'd be home at 11. And I'd repeat it every day, 6 days a week. Anyway, one night, a woman comes in, telling me a story about how husband passed away. All he ever wanted to give in life, a fur coat, a gift of a fur coat. And I don't think this woman was any older than maybe 40 years old. That's lost her husband. And all I can tell you is she made such impact on me, where she was saying, I really can't afford it. Wanted me to have this, and tribute to him, I'm going to get a fur coat. We start talking. She had a knock, or at least she told. Said to her, we ended up, what we ended up with was, you remember, I think it was style 7510. It was Blue Fox. Remember the Blue Fox air around coat? It was a full-length coat that you could zip off to be a 3/4. Then you could zip it off to be a jacket. Somehow you could zip the thing off and be a hat. I don't know. So, and I think, if I remember, we had them on sale, $999. So it was supposedly within her price. However, she didn't have money for that night. And I said to her, we do offer, credit program. And I said, all you have to do is fill out this application. I'll have an answer, in 10 minutes. fills out the occupation. I send it to Frank Harrington, and 5 minutes later, he's it's like 1, 2, 3, everything is good. She was so excited, so happy. And I says to her, I want you to pick out a monogram. We'll embroider the coat. That really makes it yours. And she says, can I have something else, not just my name? And I said, yeah, write it down what you want. And, I'll do my best to do it. She wrote a whole story about her husband, from husband to her, telling the story. And I was truly, it literally brought tears to me. I said, we're going to do it. We ended up monogramming the coat. It was like literally a whole half, with the story. Anyway, tell her, I'll have that back, send it to Chicago. It came back. Have it back probably within a week. And when I got it back, I called her. She came in. She cried. I cried. It was just a beautiful thing. She leaves with the coat. Oh, but she asked me if I could have a gift for her. She leaves with the gift wrap. A month and a half later, all carrying, telling me the woman was no good and she's not paying the bill. And, it was like, it's fraudulent information, this and that. And what do we do? He says, you're going to have to go and get the coat. And I said, what? You approved it. I'm not secure. And I agreed to get the coat. And she lived in Sheriff, which was like the next town. I went there, and she actually lived at her mom's address. I go there unannounced, on the door, mother, Indiana. I said, oh, she says, yeah, I've been waiting. It was almost like, oh, she says, oh, my daughter has a problem. It was all bullshit. Well, her story was, yeah, but she had a mental, about the husband. This modern story is all, oh, he's a good story. I'm waiting for the movie, and I cried over it. Anyway, the mother says, we've been waiting for you. I've been waiting. He'll give you back. Okay. She brought it out. Mother brought it. I never saw the door. Mother brought the coat out. It was still in the gift wrap box. So I got that coat back and I thought to myself, how sad it is that, the story was really a sad story, but it was sadder that this woman had that problem. Right. That actually included me, because Frank Harrington said to me, I'm the one that bought her. And if she doesn't pay or I don't get the coat back, I'm going to be responsible. So I did get the coat back, but it truly was a humble. It made me look at every person that I did business with after that and just try and see if I could penetrate with my eyes. Never had anybody else to
On the next episode of the Companion Podcast, in support of the film Skin on Skin, the rise and fall of the world's largest furrier.
There was this pause on the phone, and I could almost hear him leaning into the phone, and he goes, you take that credit, and you knock that chip off your shoulder, or I'll come down there and knock it off for us.
And, it looked like vomit. And he's like, aren't you going to eat anything? He says, problem is, you're selling it on cloth coats too.
I did get him there, but for months, he would say to me, have you figured out how to get to Burbank yet? And you just find the hard way sometimes.
David decided, you better put somebody there that's going to stay, or that has longevity. And he said to me, Larry, we need you to go to Hong Kong.
and it was the motor from a fish tank engine. When you hooked it up to the pipe and the hose and the gas mask.
On the next episode of the Companion Podcast, in support of the film Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier,